I think desktop and mobile, the differences in crypto actually parallel the differences in Web 2. And so if you think about the impact that, just as an example, recurring revenue services have had on SaaS businesses, I think mobile had a similar impact on, basically internet businesses of all time. And so this is something that you can do when you're at a party. This is something you can do when you're in your car. In the less developed parts of the world, you can get a cell phone for a lot less money than you can get a desktop. And so penetration is a lot broader. And basically, I think the shift to mobile from desktop only will have a similar impact on crypto that it's had, really across the rest of the economy. And I think kind of looking at, salient data points around that, most of the top apps in crypto, or dApps, really any, businesses in crypto by revenue at least, have been on Telegram.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Mind with CoinFund. My name is David Packman. I'm the head of venture investments at CoinFund, and I'm here with my co-host and my partner at CoinFund, Einar Brathen. Einar, how's it going?
Hi, David. Going well, thank you. We're really excited to speak to one of our founders, Walker, who is the mastermind behind Hello Moon, which is a Solana infrastructure platform and powering a lot of the companies building on the chain. He's also a portfolio company that we work very closely with, and I'm excited to welcome to the studio Walker Guffey. Walker, how are you doing?
I'm good. Great to see both of you.
It's great to see you. And Walker, one of the themes of this podcast has always been to sort of try to highlight some stuff in crypto that people aren't talking about. So before we get in deep to Hello Moon and all the success you're having, let's focus on our central question. What's the one thing in crypto that no one is talking about, but more people should be paying attention to?
I think it's obviously it's a great question. I think my answer to that would have to be Telegram and mobile usage, which is interesting because people don't talk about it. And I think they don't talk about the impact that it's having on crypto and on businesses in the space. But even if they don't talk about it, they are using it and they are transacting on it, and it's has really become the platform of choice in a lot of different ways.
So let's talk a little bit about the state of Telegram then and its proximity to crypto. So Telegram, a messaging app used by more than 1 billion people worldwide, much heavier used outside the US than in the US, but big in the crypto community. And they introduced a sort of native blockchain that is paired with the messaging app called Ton. And they've, I think, created a bunch of sort of app-based frameworks for you to launch apps within Telegram that allows those apps to integrate with and utilize tokens on top of the Ton blockchain. So first of all, do you think about maybe desktop differently than you think about mobile? What is it about Telegram that you're excited about?
Yeah, what I think is interesting is that, I think desktop and mobile, the differences in crypto actually parallel the differences in Web 2. And so if you think about the impact that, just as an example, recurring revenue services have had on SaaS businesses, I think mobile had a similar impact on, basically internet businesses of all time. And so this is something that you can do when you're at a party. This is something you can do when you're in your car. In the less developed parts of the world, you can get a cell phone for a lot less money than you can get a desktop. And so penetration is a lot broader. And basically, I think the shift to mobile from desktop only will have a similar impact on crypto that it's had, really across the rest of the economy. And I think kind of looking at, salient data points around that, most of the top apps in crypto, or dApps, really any, businesses in crypto by revenue at least, have been on Telegram. And so just, from DeFi Llama, I think Photon has done something like $370 million of revenue. BullX has done 170 million. Trojan roughly similar. BonkBot roughly similar. And so for businesses that are 1 or 2 years old, that's pretty remarkable traction. And again, that's not volume. That's fee revenue.
Yeah, Walker, let's maybe just take a little step back there just to make sure that we fully explain what this is, because this is a fairly new phenomenon unless you've been paying close attention. But the numbers are staggering. So all the companies you mentioned, basically, at least last time I checked, their run rating, like combined, well north of $500 million of revenue, fee revenue per year. And essentially, they're trading bots, right? They're sort of bots on Telegram with which you can buy and sell tokens. But you can buy and sell tokens through the app directly, through Telegram directly, without ever leaving. And then somehow it kind of connects to Solana predominantly for these bots in the background. It kind of executes the trade. Now, what could you, A, did I get that correct? And B, like kind of what, you've been working with a lot of these very closely. Would love to understand a little bit more kind of your experience with how this works and kind of why this has become so popular.
Yeah, I mean, the trading bots are definitely the most revenue rich kind of category, but there's been very broad proliferation beyond just that. So there are data bots, there are AI, advice related bots, all of which revolve around crypto and the various things that can be done in crypto. There are games that can be built inside of, basically mini apps as opposed to trading bots. So the trading bots are largely text based. You can add emojis and you can put in, a graphic or two in some places, but Telegram mini apps allow for much more complicated programming languages, much more complicated graphics, things like that. It's almost like a browser that you can access within Telegram. But I think what's significant about it is that crypto has lived on Telegram for at least as long as it's been my professional focus. So something, more than going on 4 years now. And so it was a social app that people lived in, people did business in, people just engaged with crypto communities, group chats at small scales, large scales, you name it. And so to integrate that with trading functionality, with data, with managing your portfolio, whatever it might be, is just incredibly powerful. Almost like WeChat or something like that.
So what one sort of clarification maybe, on the web and in mobile, the dominant form of interacting with an app is like a UX that is mostly graphical in nature, right? You click on things, you type some things into text boxes, you execute. But if you start on a messaging app as a place to launch applications from, the native form of interaction would be text-based, right? It would be like a message. So I just wanted to clarify one thing, because a lot of people hear the word bots and they think like bad word, because bots like are robots that impersonate humans on Twitter and like, spout misinformation. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about like the first application architecture that launched on Telegram was using basically text or messaging as the interface into an application. And so an obvious, if you wanted to build like a Coinbase or a trading infrastructure, then it would be more like a bot that you talk to and say, go buy me some of this or sell me some of that, right? And now I think one thing you're pointing out, Walker, is that the application environment has gotten richer in Telegram that actually allows browser like, apps to pop up with more graphical, or let's call it more traditional like experiences. But this is coming at an opportune time, right? Where a lot of people are talking about AI agents being a new form of application that's going to dominate. So do you see a world where bots or, text or conversational type interfaces dominate through messaging apps? Is that a really big future?
A lot of the projects that we've worked with have experimented with that. One of our partners had an AI, they had a Telegram trading interface that would respond to you in the voice of Benjamin Franklin, just as an example, which I think never made it out of testing because they found it to be very annoying. Just like very, very long-winded advice-based responses. But no, I mean, I think that's definitely a direction that we see things going in. I think this is kind of adjacent to that, but I think the concept of AI agents that are doing things actively for you, I think is a dangerous one. And I think it's something that people have explored, and kind of, I guess the way that I think about it is that if they can do that effectively, then that's something that you probably would not share broadly. It's something that you would just use for yourself. And if it can't do that for you, then it's probably also not something that you would share broadly. And so in terms of advice, in terms of, fetching data from the blockchain, things like that, I think there's a large role to be played. But in terms of decision making, things like that, I think that's has to be approached with caution.
Well, one of the first place that most things go in crypto is trading, since, actually I can't say it anymore. We used to say the dominant use case for crypto is for trading crypto, but that's no longer true. It's payments through stablecoins, but still, a lot of what we do in crypto is buy and sell assets. What are some other areas where you think crypto or blockchains will activate interesting applications in something like Telegram or beyond?
Well, I mean, I think the obvious answer to that would be Twitter or X. So basically anywhere that the crypto community already lives and force, I think is going to be very interesting. In terms of X's willingness to do that, we'll have to see. But to me, that's kind of the logical extension from Telegram. So yeah. In terms of other things, I mean, we're seeing AI agents related to crypto that do everything from manage your portfolio to give you advice, to give you, daily affirmations, if you're, if you're down bad, that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, it's you're just becoming more and more integrated with the rest of the world.
What do you kind of see among your customers? You service a broad set of customers on everything from the mentioned Telegram bots to DeFi and meme coins and anything in between. Curious, kind of if you see any trends or kind of what people are building these days that are kind of new and innovative on either Solana or mobile in general.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, a lot of the most interesting things in crypto seem to be playing out on Solana today, which is interesting. That certainly wasn't the case when we started, 3.5 years ago. In terms of shifts in the customer base, things like that, one thing that's very interesting is NFTs really have kind of gone away as a concept. And a lot of those communities have shifted into becoming meme coin communities. A lot of the teams that had been behind NFT projects are now behind meme coin projects, and so that's been a very interesting shift to kind of watch unfold. I mean, it's been shockingly, very shockingly popular, and then that has driven a lot of changes. Basically, I would say like auxiliary changes, right? And so trading and things like that have, people were always trading NFTs, but you trade NFTs very differently than you trade meme coins or tokens, really kind of any kind. And so we've seen basically the NFT part of our customer base has been kind of deleted and then copied and pasted over into meme coins. It's very interesting to see the extent to which they overlap. But I think probably economic drivers result in a very different profile. So that's been very interesting. We also have started to work with basically new and emerging blockchains. So there's a lot of very interesting um, technology on the L1 and L2 space that I think is starting to see more adoption. Again, Solana has been such a bright spot that it's easy to let that eclipse everything else. But the reality is there's a lot of interesting innovations underneath the hood, all across crypto.
Walker, we talk a little bit about sometimes like the how mature is the state of application development on top of blockchains, like how easy is it to deploy apps, like if one of the future use cases for blockchains is to build social applications, like how easy is it for people to build social applications? You made an observation when you started your company that it's not mature and that a bunch of infrastructure is needed to build different types of applications, particularly data-driven ones. You want to talk a little bit about what you've built at Hello Moon and who your customers are and how you help them?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just kind of to that point, I remember um, just really like being taken with the need for analytical infrastructure and things of that nature on Solana when, back when the business was started. But just kind of a funny anecdote on that front. I was trying to put together the initial pitch book, and I wanted to show to the people who'd be seeing it how important this market was. And at the time, we weren't able to get the number of users on the blockchain. You weren't able to get the volume of anything. You really couldn't get any. It was this basically entirely opaque 60, $70 billion market, which is, it's just is hard to come by in the world of business. In terms of projects that we work with, it's really changed over time. So when we started, we were focused on working with basically large scale organizations. You could think of it as, the top 10 projects, that would appear on DeFi Llama or something like that. But what we realized maybe 18 months or so into the business is that, well, that's a very interesting part of the market, and a lot of interesting things are happening in that category. The long tail of the market, so basically everything else, is dozens of times larger. So there are, literally thousands and thousands of projects that are, community driven, community based. They have communities of anywhere between a few hundred people to tens of thousands. And that, has been a very kind of interesting area for us to spend time in. And so 2 years ago, that was NFT projects. Today, it's meme coins, things like that. And then it turns out that long tail kind of has ended up driving those top protocols anyway. So if you look at Solana, you look at, Jupiter or Radium or Pump Fund or, whatever it might be. It's the long tail of the market that's driving those protocols. And if you look back to a few years ago, it was Magic Eden, it was Tensor, it was OpenSea and things like that. And again, it was the long tail of the NFT market that was really powering the large protocols. So we've gone from focusing only on large businesses to working with where the activity is really. And then in the last 6 or 7 months, we've expanded from, being very, very narrowly focused on Solana to, looking beyond that. And we found, all sorts of very interesting ecosystems outside of our home base.
Would you say that the reason for your interest in Telegram and maybe this conversation about mobile's intersection with crypto is because you're seeing more demand from the long tail of application developers who need, richer development infrastructure like you're offering?
Yeah, it's overwhelming. It's not like a trend that we've observed. It's like it's a rush of, it's more text messages than can be responded to, every day from people who are doing just that.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. It's been impressive to see. I think, yeah, at least one of the fastest growing companies that I've ever come across from that perspective. How do you think about around the innovations in infrastructure on Solana specifically, and kind of maybe contrasting it to other blockchains that you were exploring? But really, I think we're starting to see the first. I don't know. Nobody wants to call it the L2 because they all want to be Solana aligned. I think they call them extensions or something like that. Like Bullet.xyz by Zeta and like a couple of other things. Just curious if this is something you're spending time on, if you have any views on like whether A, is it necessary at all, and B, like if it's necessary, what sort of timelines are we talking here for these things to really come to fruition?
Yeah, I mean, the infrastructure space on Solana has gotten incredibly rich over time, I would say. And so it's still not easy to do pretty much anything on Solana or really on any blockchain, but it's so dramatically easier than it was, 6 months ago, 12 months ago, 2, 3 years ago. So it's been remarkable watching that change. In terms of Solana L2s and things like that, I think it's going to have to be, I don't want to say application driven because obviously there's the concept of kind of the app chain, but I think it's going to have to be application specific. And so if you think about Ethereum as a layer one, there's this obvious scaling problem where, you don't have to have mass adoption before you have issues. You have to have, like I would call it, very minor adoption before settlement on L2s, things like that becomes absolutely mandatory. Solana really has not had that problem, which is a little bit of a painful thing to say to people who have been building on Solana for a long time because, a few years ago there was downtime and things like that, but yeah, at least not for the last I think 390 days, something to that effect. And so there's not really the need to provide scale and to be able to transact without having to pay, a few $100s and wait, half an hour in the same way that there is on Ethereum. But one thing that has changed on Solana I think it's largely been driven by the shift from NFTs to tokens, is basically the execution environments that are required to be competitive. And so basically people are today focused on how do I land a transaction within, 0 blocks of whatever you're trying to follow or buy or, whatever it might be. And when you're looking at performance on that kind of basis, at that point, I think it starts to make sense to think about, if you're a large app with large scale, you may need your own version of Solana in effect. And so I don't think that we've seen an application yet that has had that need. I'm confident that it'll happen at some point, but for now, I think we haven't seen it. One thing that is interesting though is a lot of the SVM L2s, things like that, have ended up not being Solana L2s, but instead Ethereum L2s. And so basically, helping to scale Ethereum mainnet through the Solana VM, where I'd say there's a much more acute need than scaling the Solana L1 itself.
When I think about mobile applications and messaging applications, I think about even tighter requirements for responsiveness and lower latency. On desktop crypto, we sort of are used to some latency. The finality of a transaction takes some time to confirm. We're used to that. Seem to be able to be a little bit more, forgiving with desktop experiences that are a little bit slower, but not so in a messaging app or on mobile. So is that one of the things that's driving the need for richer, more responsive developer infrastructure as you're seeing all of this demand shift for application developers wanting to build sort of mobile versions of crypto apps?
No, I mean, I think that's absolutely one of the drivers. But I think beyond that, if you just look at sort of how MEV works on Solana, you look at how even token launches or liquidity pool openings, whatever it might be, work on Solana. There is a major benefit to being first, and there's a major cost to not being first. And so if you're doing something at a large scale, whether it's large scale for an individual or large scale for a business, that becomes especially acute. And just kind of comparing that to and the technical needs for that to something like NFTs. For NFTs, the only time that really was relevant was maybe during a hot mint, which took Solana down a number of times and effectively took Ethereum down by pushing gas prices so high. But then after that, you have NFTs that are listed at a floor price. You have NFTs that are listed above the floor. You basically have this really like broad dispersion across something you could almost think of as like an order book. And that's really not how it works for meme coins. It's all about spot prices and they're fungible.
Where do you see Solana heading with regards to mobile? Right, like it keeps coming up. I mean, they're literally building their own phone. Well,
Yeah, that's right.
it's a Solana phone, right? So, but at the same time, there's no like app store push or things like that. So curious, kind of, is this something that is on the community's radar? Is this a priority? Is it like, hey, we don't really care? Like, curious what your impression is of sort of like the mobile aspect of Solana.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that has just become a huge trend, an unavoidable force in the industry, but not doesn't seem to be, at least to me, to be broadly discussed. But Phantom, for example, has been a top app in the App Store a number of times. Moonshot, which is a meme coin iOS app, has been a top app in the App Store a number of times. And so you're seeing this, you're seeing these applications, get more daily downloads than Facebook or Twitter or whatever else the number one or number two would be on any given day, which I think is remarkable and speaks to the broadening appeal of crypto and also the increased intensity of usage among the existing base.
Was there like a set of innovations or infrastructure you can point to that got crypto mobile apps to the place where they can easily onboard their users and have a more traditional mobile experience? Because just a few years ago, you download a mobile wallet and you're confronted with the seed stage questions and there's no cloud syncing and, the whole password mess. So it sounds to me like we're at the place now where Web3 mobile apps are just as easy to use as Web2 mobile apps. Is there like a single moment you could point to, or sort of just evolution of some interface technology?
Well, I think the evolution of the interface technology is very important. I think evolution of wallet technology is very important, whether it's embedded directly in Telegram or whether it's done outside of Telegram. Telegram trading apps specifically, there was a very defined product market fit kind of explosion, and that was the introduction of tiered referral schemes. And so basically, what that meant is that if somebody if you referred your friend to a Telegram trading application, you would get 30% of the fees generated by their trading activity. If they referred one of their friends to the same application, you would get a percent of their friend's activity. And if that friend then referred somebody else, you would actually get a cut from that layer as well. And so what that did is it created an enormous incentive for people with large platforms to drive adoption as aggressively as possible. And so basically, was an interesting dynamic where every referral that was made was incredibly revenue rich. And then also there was a finite pool of referrals that could be made. So there was a scramble because you can only refer somebody, you can only be referred once. And so if you'd already signed up under somebody else's referral link, you were taken off the market. And so people with large platforms not only kind of distributed it to their following, but they did so very, very aggressively. And so you saw, I think it was like, you know, from 1 month to the next, like hundreds of times of growth in effect after that was introduced. It's interesting how incentives can can
I
drive
mean,
human behavior.
I think it's kind of one of the most interesting observations you're making. It's that actually, because one thing we've learned about crypto, right, is that it's an incentivization mechanism, right? It's great. We call it coordination, but really what we mean is incentivization. And so you take these sort of crypto concepts, they're not even crypto concepts, right? Sort of economic sharing or referral businesses have been around for a long time, and you apply them to trading, and boy, it starts to really work.
Yeah, no, it's remarkable, and actually even kind of competition um among the, at least in the early days, basically would come around to, well, this person's product has already been referred to everybody, but the second one has not been, and so people who missed out on the first wave, went after the second wave, and there's kind of a constant cascade of new platforms that have a fresh base of people to be referred to it. So yeah, it's been very interesting, but I think also uh, highlights the social nature of crypto, and so it's not just an incentivization, but it's also kind of I mean, in a social application. I mean, Telegram at its heart is a way for people to communicate one on one, and for people to communicate to small groups and large groups and people who they know, people who they've never met. It's a way for businesses to manage their communities, for crypto projects to manage their communities. I think even for some governments to manage communities, things like that. And so pairing that with the incentive structures that are possible in crypto, I think has, is just been explosive.
What about payments and remittances in crypto? Like one of the largest mobile use cases I think we foresee is around these topics. And I think Telegram specifically being like a very big unlock for this. There's about a billion and a half worth of tether on the Ton chain now, but they haven't really unleashed kind of the large products that actually lets you use this at scale. They're curious what, if anything, you've seen in mobile on Solana or elsewhere that kind of actually kind of starts delivering on this. Because this has also been, I would say, one of the first promises of crypto, probably payments and as well as assets on the blockchain, diamonds on the blockchain. I remember getting pitched about a decade ago. And so, but we haven't really seen it, at scale. Like there's some certain, promising things out there. Card payments are starting to get a little bit of traction, I think. But curious, what if anything, you've seen in that space.
Yeah, I think what a challenge there. So, it's very interesting. In some places in crypto, people are incredibly fee sensitive, and it's been very difficult to introduce a fee structure of any kind. So, um, swap aggregations, I think, is an example of at least in the early days, it was very difficult to get any sort of fee structure at all because you just open the door for somebody else. Whereas NFT trading, for example, there you could charge a 3% transaction fee and nobody would blink an eye. And so same thing with meme coins. There's an opportunity to charge 1% plus transaction fee for a very high turnover category like that. I think with payments and things like that, it's people have had trouble introducing aggressive fee structures, or at least there's always, basically you're competing with a native transfer function inside the chain, which doesn't have fees. And so, just going back to this concept of incentives, I think it's been harder to push that because there hasn't been as much money to be made. And so, having said that, in the last few months on Solana, but on other chains as well, we've started to work with payment providers who actually do charge transaction fees and things like that. And we actually are a large payer of those transaction fees ourselves, but the products and services are worth it. And so I think as commerce, outside of trading picks up in crypto, I think payment businesses will become larger and larger. It's just the problem is you have to compete with this free transfer, and so it really has to be a built out experience before somebody's going to, like a way to think about it is a lot of times when somebody buys, let's say, an NFT or a meme coin, they expect that it's going to go up or down by 50% on any given day, and so what does a 1% transaction fee mean? Whereas with a stable coin, if it were to go up or down by 50% on any given day, that'd be industry ending, perhaps. And so as a result, maybe people are more fee sensitive. But I also think it's just the space has to you need more the barrier has to be is higher because transferring a token itself is so easy and again has no cost. Or at least that's what we've seen. There may be activity going on that hasn't come across our plate yet, but if it is, we haven't seen it. So
one we could talk about is institutional adoption for Solana. I don't know if we want to go down that route, but maybe we should do that.
That's
just
good.
to talk about
That's a good one. Let's try that. So Walker, you're sort of the tip of the spear for developer activity because you offer a rich set of services for folks building on chain that the chains themselves don't natively produce. And so you're sort of a practical solution for folks building on chain. Traditionally, that's come from, the Web3 community, folks who are already in Web3. Are you getting any inbound, any leads, pipeline from folks in Web2 land, either Web2 traditional internet or financial institutions, or what we would maybe think of as institutional adoption of Web3 blockchains?
yeah, I mean it's a constant. Yeah, it's very heavy flow, I'd say, especially because we're headquartered in New York, where a lot of these large institutions are based, and so there's a kind of a network of people who work at these large institutions who are interested in crypto. And so those are regular conversations we've had. I think crypto as an industry moves much faster than really any industry I've seen. And so we are used to dealing with, a sales cycle of say 30 minutes, something to that effect. Whereas on the sort of the Web2 side, especially with large institutions, they move at a scale of, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, things like that. And so a lot of the conversations that we have are with Fortune 500, Fortune 50 companies who plan to do something in the next 6 months, the next 12 months, 18 months, whatever it might be. And so we are always very excited to engage with them. Sometimes ourselves, sometimes we will, pass them off directly to, one of the foundations. But there's been an explosion of interest, and I think it's inevitable. I think the ETF filings, especially on Solana, but for other chains as well, I think will draw more and more financial institutions in. Basically you'll have these sales forces that are, have a new product to sell, which I think is, existing distribution channels, et cetera. I think, business will do what it does.
And what are you seeing specifically? Are we talking around financial use cases? Is that kind of the most of it, like what the Web3 industry called real world assets, or tokenization of financial assets and other assets? Or, we're seeing payments. There was a lot of talk about Visa for a while for Solana. I haven't heard much about that, recently. But curious if you could kind of share a little bit of the flavor of type of institutions that are kind of approaching you.
A lot of it has been around ETF, things related to ETFs. So ETF providers servicing ETF providers. What can those ETF providers do with those tokens once they've been aggregated? Things like that. I think on Solana especially, it's been a very revenue generative category. I think much more so than on other blockchains. But it requires a lot of engineering work to unlock. I think there's also actually a lot of regulatory work that's required. So just as an example, from what I understand, US based ETF providers are not allowed to stake the tokens that they hold, whereas European based ETF providers have been. And so I think that there's a lot of interest in unlocking that as a service to the holders of ETFs, but also kind of as a potential monetization angle, and just thinking about what would that look like from a technical perspective, because it's not straightforward, and then also what would that look like from a regulatory perspective as well. And I'm very bullish on both of those, but I think both of those will take some time to be established.
Hey, Walker, where can people find you online to learn more about Hello Moon?
Got a website, hellomoon.io. We have a Twitter handle at hellomoon_io.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Walker. We really appreciate having you on the show. That was Walker Guffey, the founder of Hello Moon. For those of you who turned in, thank you so much for listening. If you feel passionately that we got anything right or super wrong today, let us hear from you. Let's keep the conversation going. Leave us a review. Let us know what you thought. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, or on X, I should say, my handle is @Pacman, P-A-K-M-A-N, and Einar's handle is @Einar_HB. That's EINAR_HB. Make sure you download this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and we will be back soon to dig deep on the ideas that are worth fighting for. Thanks for listening.